The two-story house in a small residential neighborhood in Ohio looked like a typical middle-class home from the outside. The lawn was carefully maintained, and planters filled with seasonal flowers lined the front entrance. The neighbors knew Margaret Thompson, who lived in this house, as a devoted grandmother, a wonderful woman who supported her daughter and grandson. However, the moment the front door closed, that mask fell away. "Rachel, you're late. I already put Ethan to bed." As soon as her daughter returned from work, Margaret stood up from the sofa and fixed her with a stern gaze. Margaret was always intimidating, and she was the absolute ruler inside the house. "I'm sorry. I had to work overtime today," Rachel answered with an exhausted expression. 2 years had passed since her divorce, and she was desperately working a part-time office job to support her son. She couldn't expect child support from her ex-husband, and returning to her parents' home had been her only option. Always making excuses. "If you had found a decent man, this wouldn't have happened." Margaret's words pierced deep into Rachel's heart, as they always did. Even though she knew the reason for the divorce, her mother always blamed her. She treated her daughter's decision to divorce, to escape her husband's infidelity and violence, as if it were her daughter's failure. "Did Ethan have dinner? I gave that child leftovers. We can't let him get used to luxury." Rachel's heart ached. Her mother was cold toward her grandson too. Despite contributing a considerable amount each month for living expenses, Ethan's meals were always meager. Rachel often shared her own portion with him. Going upstairs and peeking into her son's room, she found 7-year-old Ethan curled up in a small ball, sleeping in his bed. His brown hair was inherited from his father, but his gentle brown eyes resembled his mother's. Rachel quietly sat beside the bed and kissed her son's cheek. "Mama?" Ethan opened his eyes slightly. "Welcome home, Mama." "I'm home, Ethan. Are you hungry?" The little boy shook his head, but Rachel could tell her son was lying. The meals her mother provided weren't enough. "Tomorrow morning, Mama will make you delicious pancakes." Ethan's face brightened. "Really? Really? And this weekend, we'll go to the park too. Will Grandma come with us?" Rachel's heart tightened at her son's innocent question. Ethan continued to wish for his grandmother's love. For him, who had almost no memories of his father, his grandmother should have been precious family. However, Margaret made no effort to hide that she found Ethan bothersome. "Grandma might be busy, but I'll ask her." It was a lie. Margaret almost never spent time with Ethan. In front of the neighbors, she introduced him as her adorable grandson, but inside the house, she treated him as if he didn't exist. The next morning, Rachel made pancakes as promised. Margaret only drank coffee and read the newspaper. "Ethan, eat properly." At her mother's cold voice, Ethan tensed up and made himself small. Every time he put a piece of pancake in his mouth, he worried about his grandmother's gaze. "Mama, I drew a picture at school. Can I show it to Grandma?" Margaret didn't look up from her newspaper. "Later. I'm busy right now." Ethan's expression clouded. Rachel placed her hand on her son's shoulder. "Show it to Mama. I'm sure it's a wonderful picture." Outside, the neighborhood ladies praised Margaret as a wonderful grandmother, a devoted woman who supported her daughter and grandson. But no one knew the truth hidden beneath that mask. Margaret was a perfect actress. And the victim of that performance was a little boy who just wanted love. About 3 months after Rachel had returned to her parents' home, Margaret's attitude began to gradually change. What had initially been just complaints directed at her daughter gradually began to be aimed at Ethan as well. "Ethan, push your chair in properly. You have no manners." As Ethan finished breakfast and prepared for school, Margaret's stern voice rang out. For a 7-year-old boy, pushing a large dining chair in perfectly was difficult. "I'm sorry, Grandma." Ethan desperately tried to push the chair in with his small hands, but Margaret clicked her tongue. "What a troublesome child." "Well, I suppose it can't be helped." Ethan couldn't fully understand the meaning implied in those words, but he knew something bad was being said about him. His small shoulders hunched. After sending her son off to school, Rachel headed to work. Even though it was part-time, she couldn't afford to take time off to earn living expenses. However, she was concerned about Ethan's expression when he left the house. He seemed less energetic than before and smiled less. While working at the office, Rachel's cell phone rang. It was from the school. "Ethan seems a little down today. He doesn't have a fever, but we were worried enough to call you." She heard the gentle voice of his teacher, Mrs. Miller. Rachel's chest tightened. "Thank you. I'll check on him when I get home." After hanging up, Rachel couldn't concentrate on work. It was clear that something was happening to her son. However, she couldn't understand specifically what the problem was. That afternoon, Margaret was having tea with neighborhood friends. Refined laughter echoed through the living room. "Margaret, you really are admirable. Supporting your daughter and grandson isn't easy," Mrs. Catherine, who lived next door, said admiringly. "Oh no. We're family. Ethan is such a sweet child and the joy of my life." Margaret's voice was as sweet as honey. She sounded like the most loving grandmother in the world. "Oh yes, I saw you playing with Ethan at the park the other day. You looked so close," another friend added. In reality, Margaret had never once gone to the park with Ethan. She had probably mistaken another grandmother and grandchild. However, Margaret didn't correct her. "Yes, that child is my treasure. He tells me everything." It was a lie. Ethan was afraid of Margaret. He rarely even spoke to her. After the friends left, Margaret's mask fell away. Seeing Ethan return from school, she openly frowned. "Coming home with muddy shoes again. What kind of upbringing are you getting?" Ethan shrank as he took off his shoes at the entrance. There was indeed dirt from the schoolyard on his shoe soles, but that was normal for a 7-year-old child. "I'm sorry. Properly clean off the dirt outside before coming in." Margaret sent her grandson back outside. The October afternoon was chilly, and Ethan was only wearing a thin sweater. "Grandma, I'm cold." "You're cold because it's your own fault. Clean your shoes properly before coming in." Ethan trembled as he cleaned the dirt off his shoes with his small hands. His fingertips were cold, and tears welled up in his eyes. However, Margaret only watched from inside the house and made no effort to help. In the evening, when Rachel came home, Ethan was huddled in a corner of the sofa reading a picture book. Usually, he would wait for his mother's return at the entrance, but today was different. "Ethan, I'm home." "Welcome home, Mama." Her son's voice was smaller than usual. Rachel sat next to her son. "How was today? Did you have fun at school?" "Yes." It was a vague response. Rachel placed her hand on her son's cheek. "It was a little cold." "Aren't you cold? Are you catching a cold?" "I'm okay, Mama." Ethan forced a smile. He didn't want to worry his mother. However, it wasn't the carefree smile he used to have. Rachel noticed her son's change. That night, Rachel tried to talk to her mother about her son. "Ethan seems strange. He might have something worrying him." Margaret answered coldly. "That child is too spoiled. He needs stricter discipline. Because you're always being kind to him, he's becoming a child who doesn't know patience. But he's only 7 years old. If we don't discipline him properly now." I don't know what kind of person his father was, but it seems he didn't receive proper upbringing. Margaret's words pierced deep into Rachel's heart. Bringing up her ex-husband was her mother's usual tactic of hitting where it hurt most. The next day, after Rachel left for work, Margaret and Ethan were left alone in the house. Although there had been times when they were alone together before, Margaret's attitude escalated further. "Ethan, do you remember what your father was like?" At the sudden question, Ethan was confused. He had almost no memories of his father. "I don't know." "Of course you don't. Your father abandoned your mother and ran away. He left because he got sick of having a dirty child like you." Ethan's little heart was deeply wounded. He was hearing for the first time that his father had left because he was a dirty child. Am I a dirty child? Yes, you are. A dirty child whose father is unknown. That's why you have to behave properly. Otherwise, your mother might abandon you and leave too. For a 7-year-old boy, these words were incomprehensible. However, he understood that he was a bad child, a dirty child, and that's why he wasn't loved. Even when lunchtime came, Margaret didn't call Ethan. When the hungry boy came to the kitchen, Margaret stood up reluctantly. Here, eat this. What was placed on the plate was cold leftover soup from the night before and a piece of stale bread. It wasn't even enough to satisfy an adult. Grandma, can I have a little more? Don't be greedy. This is enough. Or do you think your father is going to send you money? Ethan silently drank the cold soup. The bread was hard, and it was difficult for his small mouth to bite through it. However, he had learned that if he complained, he would be scolded again. In the afternoon, when neighbor Mrs. Catherine came to visit, Margaret's attitude changed completely. Oh, Catherine, welcome. Ethan, say hello to Mrs. Catherine. Margaret's voice suddenly became gentle. Ethan was confused but greeted her as his grandmother prompted. Hello, Mrs. Catherine. Mike, Ethan, what good manners you have. Margaret, I can really see that your discipline is thorough. Thank you. This child is really such a good, obedient boy. We get along so well. Margaret gently patted Ethan's head. Ethan was bewildered by his grandmother's sudden change but felt a small joy at being treated kindly for the first time in a while. After Mrs. Catherine left, Margaret became cold again. It's good that you didn't say anything unnecessary. If you had said anything bad about me, you know what would happen, don't you? Ethan nodded. He didn't really understand what would constitute speaking badly of her, but he understood that he must not anger his grandmother. In the evening, when Rachel came home, Ethan was huddled as usual. However, today he seemed particularly listless. Ethan, what's wrong? Are you feeling sick? No, I'm okay. Her son tried desperately to appear normal so as not to worry his mother. However, a 7-year-old's acting couldn't deceive his mother's loving eyes. Rachel was certain of her son's changes, but she didn't know specifically what was happening. And that was the most painful thing. On the last Friday of October, an emergency occurred at Rachel's office. A colleague suddenly fell ill, and she was able to return home 3 hours earlier than planned. Usually, she would return at 6 p.m., but she was on her way home by 3 p.m. While driving, Rachel was happy to be able to come home early for the first time in a while. Ethan probably hadn't returned from school yet, but she wanted to spend time alone with her mother and talk about her son once more. She was extremely concerned about Ethan's recent behavior. As she approached the house, she saw the school bus just turning the corner. Ethan seemed to have just arrived home. Rachel parked the car and headed to the entrance to greet her son. However, when she opened the front door, she didn't hear her son's usual welcome home greeting. In the living room, only her mother was watching TV, and there was no sign of Ethan. Mom, where's Ethan? Without turning around, Margaret answered. I don't know. He probably went somewhere by himself. Rachel frowned. There was no way her 7-year-old son would go somewhere alone. Moreover, the bus had just arrived, so it was unthinkable that he had already gone out. Ethan. Rachel began searching the entire house, calling her son's name. His room on the 2nd floor, the bathroom, the basement. But Ethan was nowhere to be found. Anxiety grew in her chest. Ethan, where are you? She called louder, but there was no response. Margaret was still glued to the TV, showing no sign of trying to look for her grandson. Rachel decided to go outside and search the front and backyards. There was no one in the front yard. She also checked along the neighbor's fence, but Ethan wasn't there. When she went around to the backyard, it was getting a bit dark. Rachel walked toward the small shed at the back of the garden. Then she heard a faint sound. A small, weak sound. Like a small animal eating something. The sound was coming from the direction of the shed. Rachel approached the shed, muffling her footsteps. The old wooden shed had been built by her father when he was alive and stored gardening tools and out-of-season decorations. The shed door was slightly open. Rachel gently pushed the door open. And the sight she saw took her breath away. In the darkness at the back of the shed, Ethan was sitting on the floor. In front of him was a dog food bowl, and her son was bringing small pieces of dog food to his mouth with his little hands. He was putting the small brown pellets in his mouth one by one, as carefully as if he were eating cookies. Ethan. At Rachel's scream, her son turned around in surprise. Around his mouth were crumbs of dog food. His small face was dirty, and fear showed in his eyes. Mama. What are you doing? Why are you here? Rachel rushed to her son's side and picked him up. Ethan's small body was trembling. Whether from cold, fear, or both. What happened, Ethan? Why are you eating dog food? Her son buried his face in his mother's chest and whispered in a small voice. Grandma told me to. What did she tell you? She said I'm a dirty child, so I can't be inside the house. Rachel's heart pounded violently. And then? She told me to wait here. She said if I got hungry, I should eat this. Ethan pointed to the dog food. Rachel's body shook with anger. Her own mother had done this to her 7-year-old grandson. Mama, was I a bad boy? Ethan's innocent question tore Rachel's heart apart. No, you're not a bad boy. You're the most precious thing in the world, Mama's treasure. Rachel hugged her son as she left the shed. Her son's body was light, telling a story of malnutrition. He probably hadn't been given enough food recently. When they entered the house, Margaret was still sitting on the sofa watching TV. Rachel stood in front of her mother, still holding her son. Mom, what is the meaning of this? Margaret slowly turned around. Then, seeing Rachel and Ethan, she smiled thinly. Oh, you found him. Why did you lock Ethan in the shed? Why did you make him eat dog food? I didn't lock him up. I just gave that child a place that suits him. Rachel couldn't believe her mother's cruel words. A place that suits him? Making a 7-year-old child eat dog food? Well, you don't even know who that child's father is. Margaret stood up and looked down at her daughter and grandson. That child is dirty. Unknown bloodline, a child of uncertain origin. So he doesn't deserve to be in the clean places inside the house. Mom. I just gave that child a place that suits him. Outside in the shed, eating dog food. Isn't that fitting? Rachel was speechless with anger. She had never thought her own mother was such a cruel person. Ethan trembled in his mother's arms. Mom, you're insane. You're the one who's insane, Rachel. Having a child whose father you don't even know and making me take care of him. Do you understand how embarrassed I am in front of the neighbors because of that child? Ethan is my son. And he's your grandson. Grandson? Margaret laughed through her nose. It's questionable whether that child really has our blood. You don't even know who the father is, given how many men you've been with. At this insulting remark, Rachel reached her limit. That's enough. We're leaving right now. Leaving? Where to? Do you even have a place to go? There was a tone of victory in Margaret's voice. Do you think you can raise that child, a penniless, skillless, single mother? Rachel didn't answer. It was true that she was in financial difficulty. However, she couldn't continue to expose her son to her mother's abuse. Think again, Rachel. If that child leaves here, an even more miserable life awaits him. At least here, he has a roof over his head. A roof means nothing without love. Rachel went upstairs, still holding her son. She needed to pack. She didn't know where they would go, but they had to leave this house immediately. Sitting Ethan on her bed, Rachel spoke gently to him. Ethan, shall we live in a new house with Mama? But what about Grandma? We'll say goodbye to Grandma for a while. But it's okay, Mama will protect you. Ethan nodded quietly. Fear still remained in his eyes, but she could also see trust in his mother. That night, Rachel left her parents' home with her son. She had nowhere to go, but decided to stay at a nearby motel for one night. After spending the night in the small motel room, Rachel made an important decision the next morning. She would take action to prove her mother's abuse and protect her son. First, Rachel began by documenting her son's condition. Ethan's thin body, photos of when she found him in the shed, and she recorded her son's testimony. The 7-year-old boy, encouraged by his mother, talked about everything his grandmother had said to him, one by one. "Grandma said I was a dirty child. And because I don't have a daddy, I can't be in the house." Ethan's small voice trembled, but Rachel continued recording his testimony while gently encouraging him. "The dog food didn't taste good, but I was hungry, so I ate it. Grandma told me to eat it." Next, Rachel contacted her paternal relatives. There had been little contact since the divorce, but Sarah, her ex-husband's sister, had always cared about Ethan. "Rachel? What's wrong, calling so early in the morning?" Sarah's surprised voice came through the phone. "Sarah, it's an emergency. Ethan is being abused." When she explained the details, Sarah was furious. "How terrible. I'll introduce you to a lawyer right away. And we need to inform all the relatives." Sarah acted quickly. Her ex-husband's family all loved Ethan and were deeply outraged when they learned the facts. At the same time, Rachel began contacting her maternal relatives. She called her mother's sister, Aunt Rose. "Aunt Rose, I'm sorry to bother you when you're busy. I have something very important to discuss." Rose initially seemed incredulous. Margaret would do such a thing? But she always said she loved her grandson. That was only in front of the neighbors. "I have evidence." Rachel sent the recordings and photos. After a silence, Rose raised her voice in anger. "Unforgivable. This can't be allowed." The reports to relatives spread like a snowball. Margaret's brother, cousins, and family friends. Everyone was shocked and furious. "We had been her guarantors, but we'll withdraw immediately," Uncle Frank said angrily. "We have no obligation to take care of such a person." Michael, Margaret's cousin who had been a guarantor for her credit card, felt the same way. "I'm canceling the guarantor contract. I'll also contact the bank." The relatives' reactions were unanimous. They would cut ties with Margaret. Meanwhile, the truth began to spread among the neighbors. Mrs. Catherine was appalled when Rachel told her the facts. "No way. We were completely deceived. I thought she was the perfect grandmother. I have evidence too. Would you like to see it?" Rachel showed her the photos and recordings. Mrs. Catherine cried. "That sweet Ethan went through such things. We should have noticed something was wrong." The network of neighborhood women was powerful. The truth spread instantly, and Margaret's reputation as a devoted grandmother crumbled. "We were fools for believing her words. We shouldn't judge just by appearances." People's attitudes changed completely, and Margaret became completely isolated from the community. Through her lawyer, Rachel began formal proceedings to sever ties with her mother. "The evidence of abuse is sufficient," declared lawyer Mr. Johnson. "We can also get a restraining order against your mother. And regarding your child's custody, you can retain it completely." More importantly, Margaret's economic foundation began to crumble. Because the relatives withdrew as guarantors, her credit was revoked and various contracts could not be renewed. And then the decisive moment arrived. One morning, when Margaret went to the dining table, an envelope was placed there. The sender was listed as Sunset Meadows Nursing Home. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope to find the results of her admission screening. "We regret to inform you that we must decline your admission to our facility as we cannot confirm your personal guarantors. We have also discovered problems with your credit information." Margaret's face went pale. This letter was from the luxury nursing home she had applied to months ago. It was a facility for spending an elegant retirement, preparing for the future. Reading further, there was even more shocking content. However, admission to the state-subsidized low-income facility Oakview Care Center is possible. This facility provides minimum living guarantees. Margaret collapsed into her chair. Oakview Care Center was known as the worst nursing home in town. It was known for its old facilities, understaffed conditions, and poor meals. It was exactly the environment she had been giving Ethan. The phone rang. It was from the bank. "Ms. Thompson, the guarantors have applied to cancel their contracts. Therefore, we need you to repay your loans in full." "Full repayment? I don't have that kind of money." "Then we'll need to use your residence as collateral." Margaret dropped the receiver. She might lose her house. And there was no one left, no relatives, no friends, no neighbors, to support her. That afternoon, Rachel visited Margaret's house with her lawyer. She was there to deliver formal notice of severing ties. "Mom, this is the end," Rachel said calmly. "From now on, don't have anything to do with us. Don't come near Ethan either." Margaret showed fear for the first time as she received the documents. "Rachel, aren't we family? Family loves and supports each other. What you did to Ethan is not what family does. But I have no one else. That's the path you chose yourself." Rachel left the house without looking back. The next day, Margaret received her final letter. It was a notice from the State Welfare Department that her admission to Oakview Care Center had been decided. The monthly cost would be covered by state assistance, but it would only guarantee minimum living conditions. As Margaret read the letter, she remembered the words she had said to Ethan, "I just gave him a place that suits him." Now those words had come back to her. A week later, Margaret stood in front of Oakview Care Center with just one small suitcase. The building was old, the paint was peeling, and the garden was in ruins. It was exactly like the shed where she had confined Ethan. "You must be Ms. Thompson. This is your room." The room she was shown to was small and dingy. The view from the window was just a parking lot. That night, Margaret sat before a poor dinner. Cold soup and hard bread. Exactly the meal she had given Ethan. No visitors came. No one called. Margaret was completely alone. And she was finally beginning to understand that this loneliness was something she had created herself. 6 months later in spring, Rachel and Ethan had started a new life in a small town on the opposite side of the state. The 2-story apartment wasn't luxurious by any means, but it had a bright living room with warm sunlight streaming in, and Ethan had his own small room. "Mama, look." When Ethan came home from school, he happily showed her a picture. On the drawing paper was a picture of him and Rachel holding hands and smiling. Unlike before, his pictures used bright colors, and both their faces had big smiles. "It's a wonderful picture. Let's put it on the refrigerator." Rachel hugged her son. Ethan's weight had increased healthily, and color had returned to his cheeks. Seeing her son, who now ate 3 proper meals a day and laughed a lot, those dark days felt like they had happened long ago. Rachel was working at a small local accounting firm. The salary was less than before, but her boss and colleagues were kind and understood about her son. When Ethan had a fever, they let her leave early saying, "Family comes first." After dinner, it had become routine for Ethan to have picture books read to him while sitting on Rachel's lap. "Mama, can I invite friends to my birthday party?" "Of course. You can invite as many as you want." Ethan's eyes sparkled. He had quickly made friends at his new school. His teacher, Mr. Davis, praised him saying, "Ethan is a very caring child." Despite his painful experiences, her son had maintained a heart that could be kind to other children. "Mama, I'm not a dirty child anymore, right?" One night, Ethan asked in a small voice. Rachel's chest tightened. Her son still hadn't completely healed from those wounds. "Ethan, listen carefully." Rachel took her son's hands. "You were never a dirty child from the beginning. You are the most precious thing in the world, Mama's treasure. And you're a very kind, smart, wonderful boy." "Really? Really? Do you think Mama would lie?" Ethan shook his head. Then he hugged his mother. Meanwhile, at Oakview Care Center, Margaret sat in a chair by the window. Days continued without any visitors or phone calls. The meals were still cold, the room was cramped, and the staff was too busy to have personal conversations. "Don't you have any visitors?" a new staff member asked. "No." Margaret answered briefly. "What about family?" "I don't have any family." It wasn't a lie. Legally and practically, she no longer had family. It was the result of her own choices. From the next room, she could hear voices of a resident's grandchildren visiting. Children's laughter, family conversations. Margaret wanted to cover her ears, but the sound still reached her. At night, Margaret stared at the ceiling and thought. If she had made different choices back then. If she had truly loved Ethan as her real grandson. If she had supported Rachel. But time doesn't go backwards. She had to accept the consequences of her actions. On a spring evening, Rachel and Ethan were walking in the neighborhood park. Cherry blossom petals danced in the wind, and warm sunlight enveloped them both. "Mama, we're a family, right?" "Of course, Ethan. Even without grandparents?" Rachel stopped and looked into her son's eyes. Family isn't just about blood relations. The most important thing is loving each other, cherishing each other, and protecting each other. That's what we do, isn't it? Ethan nodded. Yes. Mama protects me, and I care about Mama too. That's real family. We're a perfect family. The two walked home hand in hand. To their small but warm home. There was love there, respect there, and the bonds of true family. Not connected by blood, but by heart, true family was there.